To the Father Greg MacLeod lecture series. Today, Father Greg would be 90 years of age. Today is his birthday. So we wish Greg happy birthday, knowing that he's also interceding for us for Cape Breton University. And with that, I'd like to invite up one of our CBU chaplaincy students, who's also part of our Newman Society, and she comes to us from India. And Ayushi, she will be our MC for the evening.
Hello and good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'd like to welcome all of you to the lecture series tonight, which is sponsored by the Newman Society and the CBU chaplaincy team. Shout out to them. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on the Mi'kmaq land. And my name is Ayushi. I'm part of the CBU chaplaincy team. I'll be the MC for tonight, and it is my pleasure to do so. To start off the evening, I'd like to call upon another member of our CBU chaplaincy team, Fatima, to give the introduction to our guest speaker tonight.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Fatima Halilu, and I'm honored today to give the introduction. So, Damien MacPherson served as the director of the Office of the Ecumenical and Interfaith Affairs in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Toronto. He served in that position from 1999 to 2017. He has received certificates of recognition from the present Mayor of the City of Toronto, Olivia Chow, and the Toronto Area Interfaith Council. On behalf of the Canadian Interfaith Conversation, he was awarded with the King's Charles III Coronation Medal for his outstanding service in fostering respect and understanding of religious traditions in Canada. He has assisted in leading two successful pilgrimages of Christians, Muslims, and Jews to Jerusalem, a first effort of its kind in Canada. He was honored by the National Muslim and Christian Liaison Committee and the Canadian Council of Imams at their annual banquet for his interfaith initiatives. He is the founding president of the Toronto Area Interfaith Council. The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops has acknowledged his ministries within their Archdiocese of Toronto and other parts of Canada. He represented the CCB on National Christian-Hindu Dialogue. On behalf of the Archdiocese, he served on a number of boards of directors throughout the Greater Toronto Area. Reverend MacPherson is a Franciscan friar of the Atomic Grammar, whose international headquarters are located in New York. Within his religious community, he served as the Vicar General, living in Manhattan, New York at the time. He has served in pastoral ministry in Windsor, Ontario, and Richmond, in British Columbia. He has also served as Director for Campus Ministry in the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City and taught Catholic theology at Oklahoma City University, a Methodist institution. Reverend MacPherson is a graduate from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He did a postgraduate studies at Fordham University in the Bronx, New York, at the Angelicum Pontificale University in Rome, Italy. He has written numerous articles in the related field of ecumenism and interfaith. Reverend MacPherson, S.A., is one of the 13 children and it's native of New Waterford in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Well, let me tell you, I need to get a copy of that. You know, we're supposed to be here to tell the truth. Anyway, you know, let me tell you, to be honestly, it's a pleasure to be here, and trust me when I say that. I used to have friends here, but there's a few of them that pressed me into this obligation here, and they're here tonight, but I won't name them. But nonetheless, I'm delighted to be here, quite frankly. And my first part of my talk was to give you all that information. And now I don't have to do it anymore, and I don't know where you got it from. So I wanted to say that, you know, from the time I was a young boy here in Cape Breton and in New Waterford, as a child, as a teenager, although my initiative and my efforts here are to speak more broadly about Christian Jews and Muslims and so forth, I want you to know, much like many of you, I think, as a child, I grew up, I never met a Muslim. I never shook hands with a Muslim. I didn't even know where Islam might have been. In all my studies and talks and so forth as a child. And let me tell you as well, neither did I ever meet a Hindu over there in Lingan, New Waterford, Road. There are no Muslims and there were no Hindus. But I did meet, quite frankly, a number of Jews, because Jews had established a real presence in this area over the years. And, you know, they came to us basically because of their business mind and their ability to work hard and to employ many. But my father worked for a Jew for many years. So I gained a certain measure of respect for Jews because of their integration, you might say, into the community. But I have to say that as a young child, there was no tension between interfaith. In fact, I don't think we spoke about interfaith very much at all as a young person. And if there was any tension to be had, we felt it between Protestants and Catholics. Isn't that the case? And to some degree, it's not entirely washed away, but we've done a great job in trying to bury that history and that past. And so that whole circumstance of not knowing other religions, other world religions, came to a change. And it happened in 1962. Now, how old were you in 1962? No? And that's when the Second Vatican Council was convened by Pope John XXIII in 1962. And that council caught the attention of the whole world. And quite frankly, for those who have any sense of church today, it continues to influence the life and the behavior of the Roman Catholic Church and of Christianity in general. You know, it produced 16 documents in its final stage. But on October 28th of 1965, when it was still in session, the council produced the smallest of their documents, the smallest one. And it was called, and you won't remember this, Nostra Aetate, Latin for in our time. And it's a document of, guess what, 1,600 words. 1,600 words. And its impact was seismic. It was just incredible what that document has done to the Roman Catholic Church and indeed to Christianity in general. It introduced the universal call for mutual respect and dialogue, especially with the Jews. You know, you don't have to be well educated to know that the history of the Roman Catholic Church with the Jews and the Muslims is pathetic. It's really a scandal. And the church acknowledges that in part of its documentation as it attempts to go forth. But the decree Nostra Aetate, as it tried to recapture or in a sense change that relationship between Jews, it also, notably as well, the decree called for the acceptance and respect of Muslims and Hindus and other world religions, something entirely new to the Catholic faith. Your parents would be overtaken by surprise to know that the Catholic Church is talking to us about the importance of Muslims and Hindus and Jews. You know, it was a document which enabled Pope John Paul II, now, when speaking to a young group of Moroccan Muslims in Casablanca, to say this, quote, "We believe in the same God." He's speaking now to a group of young college-level students. And he's telling them, we believe in the same God. The first time they've ever heard that. And the first time many Catholics have ever heard that. We believe in one God, he says, the living God. The God who created the world and brings creation to its perfection. And all who seek the same God, we are all who seek the same God with a sincere heart. That kind of language is brand new on the lips of the Church. The effects of this document really continues to this day, not even in its fullness. And it continues to challenge and to transform and really to change the world at large. And so, to continue on, let me say it's important to remind and perhaps clearly clarify the difference, just quickly, between, because it's not clear in many people's mind, the difference between ecumenical and interfaith, because sometimes we mix them together. You know, within the whole Christian world, that council produced what's called a decree on ecumenism. And that decree on ecumenism, the goal of that decree was to call all Christian churches, Protestants, you know, Anglicans, to the unity which we hear of spoken and preached about in our own churches in John's Gospel, that they all may be one. As you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. That's the intensity and that's the integrity of the Gospel of John's text, and the Church called us in a new way to pay attention to that decree, and also to make efforts to incorporate whatever it may be that it can to bring a sense of unity into our belonging. You know, I'm reminded of the story, you know, the Catholic who died. You know, you've probably heard this story. It was a Muslim who died, and St. Peter welcomed him at the gates. And as he walked in to the gates, you could hear all this joy and celebration and jubilation. And so the Muslims said to St. Peter, what's all that about? And St. Peter said, well, those are the Catholics. They think they're the only ones here. It was a great surprise to many to know that. So the Church then invested itself into an outreach, and still does today. And to some degree, it reached the peak, but I have to say the ecumenical level of enthusiasm has quieted down a bit, but not until it has succeeded in many ways to make a difference. And so I think the enthusiasm and the strength of the ecumenical movement gave a new initiative, gave strength to this decree of Nostra Aetate, whereby the Church is being called to work with interfaith working groups. And so ecumenical then is an entirely different text. And the interfaith activity, on the other hand, is related solely and only to world religions that it notes in that decree. Now, Protestants and Roman Catholics are encouraged to be present and participate when interfaith initiatives are taking place. And so the decree Nostra Aetate clearly affirms that Christians and Muslims have badly understood one another, and sometime in the past have openly opposed one another, even to the event of warfare. And that document simply says we should leave the past where it is, and let's begin with a new initiative. And so an important and distinguishing component which gave integrity to the interfaith movement was the essential point of knowing that we gather in that space, in that place, not to be converted, So conversion is not a term you hear in interfaith, you shouldn't hear it in interfaith dialogue. You know, and just one consideration, that Catholics are not out to convert Muslims, and Jews are not out to convert Muslims either, or Jews. But we're there for a different reason entirely. And that's what opens the way. That's what creates the possibility for dialogue. This sense in which we come with a measure that what I'm bringing is okay, and what you have is okay, and that what we have together is even better. So that this notion of setting aside the notion of being conversion as referred to in John's Gospel is simply not a priority, but has given real motivation to work diligently in the interfaith movement. In the interfaith world, the motivating factor which gives integrity to interfaith dialogue and cooperation includes these simple facts. Mutual trust. Now you can just imagine yourself sitting around a table with a handful of Jews and Muslims. Do you trust? Is there trust, or is there suspicion? Is there uncertainty? What are they up for? Do they really want to know what I believe? Do I want to know what they believe? Why are we here? Well, those are kinds of questions that in some way get in the way, I would say. Because when the work of interfaith begins to happen, it's built on, the foundation of it is mutual trust, a common understanding, careful listening, and a hospitality and a sensitivity to prayer. You know, especially when prayer is part of the whole process. You know, at the appropriate time, I think it's fitting for the interfaith group for each of them to share in some way the major teaching of their religion. I need to know that. I mean, they need to know that I believe that Jesus Christ is Lord of heaven and earth and Savior of the world. They need to know that. I'm not going to hide that from anybody. But that doesn't mean I'm going to convert them. And I need to know, and maybe I'll be surprised by the fact that, yeah, Muslims accept Jesus. Oh, really? We didn't know that. Yeah, Muslims accept Jesus. They accept him as a prophet, not as a savior. And they respect him. And you will be surprised, as I was, to see the devoted attention Muslims give to Mary. You know, there's more written about Mary in the Quran than we have in the New Testament. And so Mary is a very cherished topic among Muslims, those at least who are practicing and pray accordingly. And so, you know, that's part of the respect of what builds our respect. And as the appropriate time and in a fitting way, we introduce the other to these elements of our belief and faith, so that we don't sit together around the table in dialogue as strangers, but really those are part of the building blocks of the kinds of friendship that's required in interfaith dialogue. You know, and let's face it, I don't have to convince you for a moment that the fractured and broken state of our world cries out, pleading for the need for interfaith initiatives and the power it brings to heal and restore the loss of justice, the urgency for peace, and the restoration of civil order. It should be of no surprise that the common value of peace and the pursuit of justice is a unifying element in all religions. Doing justice, loving one another, and working for peace is a central mission to all God's people in the world. We don't have a bigger part of it, and you don't have a bigger part of it, but together we all own a big part of it. Muslims and Christians, you may be surprised that Muslims and Christians believe the Jewish scriptures when it says, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift a sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Muslims and Christians believe the Jewish text in Isaiah when it's spoken. Jews and Muslims believe Christian scriptures, which teaches and tells us, quote, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God," in Matthew. Jews and Christians believe the Quran on its insistence that the greetings of peace are central to the foundation of Islam. Now you want to interrupt me and say, "Excuse me, Father, but that's not what I don't understand about Muslims. They're always killing and are at war even to this day. What are you telling me that for?" Well, guess what? If you took a moment to look at the history of Christianity and the violence it bestowed upon people of innocence, you would be very surprised to know how bad we were and how bad we behaved. And so, to the degree that we may not be at war as much as Muslims are, the fact that they are doesn't mean that that they don't have their own rightful dignity. That's why we pray for peace. That's precisely why we pray for peace. You know, in a recent talk given by Pope Leo in celebration of the 60th anniversary of this decree, Nostra Aetate, in our time, he notes this, and I quote, "As we walk the interfaith journey, we do so by not compromising our belief. Our beliefs by remaining true to our convictions." In other words, we don't engage in dialogue to allow others to convince us to believe differently. No. We walk the interfaith journey, and we do so by not compromising our beliefs, but by remaining true to our convictions. He further confirms that, quote, "Authentic dialogue begins not in compromise, but in conviction." I love that. I really am stirred by that. Not by compromise, but by conviction. And so as a strong Christian believer talking to a Muslim, my belief is not challenged. My belief is foundational, it's fundamental, it's rooted. But I can learn something new from what is being said. But it's not a learning that seeks to take away the fundamental faith of what I believe. You know, it's in the deep roots of our own faith belief that gives us strength to reach out with confidence to the other. It was eye-opening and unexpected news to Roman Catholics and to the world in general when this document, Nostra Aetate, recognized the fact, quote, "The Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in these religions." That's a blessed statement. The Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. And so that should call us to a certain sense, maybe a new sense of awareness when I greet and meet. And by the way, much more today than in my time, we had the opportunity to meet and greet Muslims and Hindus within our own communities here. We're fortunate in having recent comments from Pope Leo in celebrating the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. Again, I invite you to listen to his personal comments addressed to a group of interreligious leaders just recently, when he reminded them, and I quote again, those religious, Christians, Muslims, Jews, share a sacred responsibility to help our people break free from chains of prejudice and anger and hatred, and to help them rise above egotism and self-centeredness, to help everyone overcome the greed that destroys both the human spirit and the earth. Jews are responsible to do that. Muslims are responsible to do that. And so are Christians and all other religions. taken seriously, these remarks again remind and teach us that our common mission is in the hope of winning humanity. That quite frankly, in some ways, in many ways, is tempted by despair. Despair is present. You know, I just today was informed of one man who, that despair took his life. He took his life today. Not because he didn't have bread to eat, I don't know why, but it's more in terms of what's going on internally inside. And so that kind of behavior is still very present among us. And I think our response is very important in ways that we might be able to change in some way that kind of behavior. You know, I clearly and convincingly believe that support for the Interfaith Initiative is not a choice that we arbitrarily make, but has become an obligation that we must now necessarily assume. And if you're not there yet, believe me, I hope you will soon arrive, because it's here. At this point, then allow me to share with you a few samples that interfaith has allowed to succeed in my own personal story, you know. It's about the bold effort, I'd say, if you could allow that to happen. It happened when I and a few others in Toronto came together and talked a bit and decided that let's see what would happen, for example, if we made this possible. So my first sort of major interfaith initiative while in Toronto was to coordinate a Jewish, Christian, Muslim pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Now, today that would be laughed at in many ways. And so, as strange as that may sound, we numbered about 50 mixed Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and we're on the road for 5 days over in Jerusalem. And it's well known that competing interests are there between Muslims and Jews, and especially regarding Jerusalem, especially for those who have never been there. They migrated quickly, for example, to the Temple Mount al-Mosque, where Muslims believe, actually, that it was the place that the Prophet Muhammad took a nighttime pilgrimage to heaven. And it's the same temple area, of course, where Jesus went in and out of the doors many times. And so Christians have a certain invested interest in that as well. And of course, for Jews, it's their homeland. But the Temple Mount is not open space for everybody and anybody at all times. It's very protected, and there are times when Christians are not permitted to cross the threshold of the Muslim sites that are present there. And so, one of the most memorable events of that experience. And let me say that once the Muslims got enough of their own traditional experience there, they mixed very well with Jews, and especially with the Christians, who have, we could spend weeks over there in terms of what has been left for us. But one of the things that stirred me most was that other Christians and Jews began to recognize and be told, we were being told as pilgrims, have you heard that the local people are talking about this group who are Christians and Jews together, that they're here and they're seeing our historic sites. They couldn't believe it. They could not believe that a group of Christians, Muslims, and Jews were together in unity, recognizing and identifying the historic points of their own faith. And so I thought that was a particularly insightful event. And when we come back to Toronto, the groups that knew we were gone could not wait until we could tell them what happened. They were all ready to listen, and so they did. And so we had a huge crowd. And before we left the meeting that evening, I remember, several people making the gesture, we need to go again. Is there enough people that would? Oh yeah, the hands went up all over the place. They just felt that interest was so, that our interest was so educational and so meaningful and so powerful. And so that mix and mingling of the Jews and Christians and Muslims, I'm sure has its continuing effect even to this day. So that was one experience, I think, that generated from the interfaith dialogue. Are you still with me? Okay, just checking. In retrospect, I'd like to say part of my initiative as the Director for Ecumenical and Interfaith Affairs for the Archdiocese of Toronto was to not just be concerned with ecumenism, but also interfaith. And any of you who know anything about Toronto, it's a fertile place for interfaith activity, especially with the degree to which the Muslims migrated to Toronto after that terrible accident in New York City on the whatever. They came in abundance. And so when I went there as director, among my first interests was to know what the interfaith community are doing and where they are and how to identify them. Now there was, I must say, an active and successful Christian-Jewish dialogue in Toronto, which, by the way, celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, which is nothing less than remarkable. And so I felt it was important for me to kind of gently make my way through the other interfaith presence in the community. And let me say this, that I always felt that I got a grand welcome because, if you're a Hindu in Toronto and you get recognized by the Roman Catholic Church, that is significant. I mean, they take that to be very, very important and gives them new encouragement among themselves. After I made it took me about 3 years to softly make my way through around the other interreligious groups. And finally I decided the time is ripe. The time is ripe to do something. And so I took the initiative to call leaders from various different religious groups together in Toronto. And as I say, I got great respect because they knew it was the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Diocese, who's sponsoring some of this stuff. So they came with great pleasure, quite frankly. And I proposed to them that we should establish a Toronto Area Interfaith Council that would, in some ways, address the needs that are not being attended to, that a Toronto Area Interfaith Council could attend to and take ownership of. And I must say that in retrospect, we coalesced quite nicely and rather quickly as a council. The group shaped itself into a very successful and effective presence within the city and surrounding area. And I accepted their request that I would be the chairperson, and I played that role for the first 5 years. You know, their presence, the council's presence, brought peace and understanding to areas and concerns of the city which might have otherwise been divisive. The council continues to be involved in an alphabet of important concerns. And you'll be surprised, perhaps, to know that at present, one of the major concerns of the group is to address the immense problem that is present on the city streets of Toronto with regards to the homeless and the tent cities that are present there. And so, in an attempt to respond to that, the Toronto Area Interfaith Council is proposing to undertake a project to build 100 small unit homes in the city of Toronto. And hopefully it will be a success. It will take time, it will take energy, it will take cooperation, it will take a continuing need for interest. You know, I remain a member of the board of directors of that group, which, by the way, is celebrating its 20th anniversary in January. So it's been going for quite a while and has caught the recognition far and wide within that area. So that even the mayor, for example, the mayor of the city, she's just recently called in leadership of that council together to sponsor a public breakfast of recognition for the work of the council. And given the bleak and troublesome history of the Jews, Catholics, and Christians in general, the present state of affairs is remarkably improved, and it must be continued. And you know, another example that comes forth as a result of interfaith prayer and interfaith group, it centers around the 90th birthday of the oldest living active rabbi in the city of Toronto, Rabbi Irwin Shield. Following some prudent discussion with other Jews and the Cardinal himself, Cardinal Collins at that time, Archbishop of Toronto, it was agreed that I should proceed to secure a papal blessing for the 90-year-old Jewish rabbi. I mean, there's shock and fear even at the thought of it at some points. But we did it. And so I made a request and received from Rome a special, very impressive papal blessing, which I had suitably framed. It was beautiful. And then accompanied by His Eminence, Cardinal Collins, together we went to the home of Rabbi Shield, and following some brief informal conversation, and in the presence of his wife, Mrs. Shield, His Eminence presented the papal blessing to Rabbi Shield. And I have to tell you, I wish any of you and all of you could have been there. It was received with visible respect and accompanied by a high degree of expressed gratitude. It was touching. It was remarkable. It was historic. To be sure, an event was the offspring of interfaith dialogue. And this was the first of such, and I don't think it's been repeated in all of Canada. And so I look upon that as a mark of gratitude for the way by which interfaith profits us our rewards. You know, a second example, it involves His Eminence Cardinal Aloysius Ambrose. He also was the Archbishop of Toronto, and the 50th anniversary celebration of the oldest temple in the city of Toronto. I was asked by the planning committee by the members of the planning committee if I would possibly approach His Eminence, the Cardinal, to speak at the occasion of this significant event for the Jews. So, when I approached His Eminence, I don't know if any of you know Cardinal Collins, he's kind of a very sincere man, but I broke down some of his walls, actually. And I was a bit surprised as he seemingly hesitated when I asked him if he would consider talking at the 50th anniversary. And so, without making a commitment at that point, he told me that he would be in touch with me. I wonder what that meant. After a few days, he called me back to his office and said he had agreed to accept the invitation. So, when I relayed that information to the planning committee, they told me to inform His Eminence that he was free to choose his own topic. And so he did. I told him I'd like to attend myself. And so I did, along with the president of St. Michael's University College, who actually introduced him to the Jewish audience. You know, I can still see it. With 5 simple cue cards in hand, he came up to this podium and began to speak about the first 5 books of the Old Testament. How appropriate a topic if we're going to talk to Jews, huh? It's there. So, you know, the books of Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, we all hear those words ourselves. So his audience was 100% Jewish. And many of them were of high-ranking members. And so, to be brief, I want to say that they were totally overwhelmed and genuinely impressed at his knowledge of their scriptures. They expressed their total approval and complete satisfaction with his presentation by giving him an overwhelming and extended standing ovation. It was something to be seen and recorded. They simply were overwhelmed, and so was I, quite frankly. Such is just one more example of what can happen when interfaith initiatives succeed. Given the political climate today, I hardly think some such things can be or want to be repeated, given the Middle East crisis. You know, and by the way, on the way out of the talk, he sort of turned to me in a quiet and sheepish way and said, "How can I do?" I said, "Your Eminence," I said, "you hit a home run. And the bases were loaded. A grand slam." Oh, he stood for the higher. So, I just have one more experience to give you before you get too bored. I just want to share this one, and it involves the Muslim community of Toronto. You know, given the large presence of Muslims, I was more engaged with them than the Hindu and other religious groups, though for me each of the groups were very important and to be recognized. However, at one point I felt the need to further reach out to the Muslim community by inviting a number of imams to my office simply to get introduced and gather them together. I didn't know how many there would be or how many would come, but when I shared my plan with His Eminence, at this time Cardinal Collins, I was delighted when he expressed an interest and wanted to be involved. With this interest awakened, actually Cardinal asked me, said, could I be part of this? So I said, yeah, Your Eminence, you could come too. So he did. And so with that interest, with his interest, I broadened the scope of my outreach to the Muslim community. And I succeeded in receiving a positive response from 15 imams, some of whom I had known, the most of whom I would meet for the first time. We gathered in a space immediately outside of the Cardinal's office, containing a large round table, very convenient space and place. And so before inviting the Cardinal to greet and welcome the imams, I thought it would be appropriate. It was a risk, but I said, we'll pause for silent prayer. So we did. The room full of imams and the Cardinal and I. It was dramatic. Following a brief greeting and welcome by the Cardinal, I then also thanked the imams for their presence. I reminded them that this gathering is limited to an opportunity for each of you to introduce yourselves and say something briefly about yourself and your mosque and your community. You know, I was truly impressed and somewhat overwhelmed with gratitude by the kind of respect and polite behavior of the group as each made an informative response. As the program proceeded, I could not help but think of the uniqueness of this gathering. Surely, again, the first of its kind throughout Canada. I doubt whether it has been reproduced since that time. And if I had continued on, I would have built upon that in other ways as well. Because the foundation was beginning to take shape. The sense of acquaintanceship was beginning to happen. And maybe even a measure of trust was already in place. So, you know, the event, which took more than 1 hour, concluded with His Eminence giving supportive recognition to the importance of their ministry and the assurance given to them of cooperation with any events in which we might share a common cause. I thought that was very, very life-giving to those imams, you know, and their relationship with us. The Cardinal remained among them in order to personally greet each of them and thank them again for their presence. The event proved to be overwhelmingly successful, and it was the first of its kind, as I say, in all of Canada. Again, I want to stress that such an experience of this is clearly teaches and tells us that interfaith initiatives are not about erasing differences. Oh, please don't ever forget that. It's not about erasing differences or about blending traditions into one body. Instead, it's about standing side by side, each person rooted in their own faith, reaching toward a common horizon, rooted in hope. Such awareness helps us discover that compassion and forgiveness are not the ownership of any one faith, but the shared inheritance of all humanity. While the Amen of our interfaith prayer should give full recognition and respect to what divides us, the same Amen gives strength and promotes to that which unites us in our common pursuit for justice and peace. It's not peace at any price. Instead, peace goes hand in hand with justice. The visible presence of such interfaith unity, you will believe me, cries out today, more than ever. And it's helpful to be reminded that in so many instances where we are more like one another than we are different. You know, I agree, and I hope you do as well, that when the world sees people of different faith come together for a common concern, it sends a message more powerful than speech itself. Again, I repeat, such actions send a message that unity is possible without uniformity, that harmony can exist amid diversity, and that peace begins with the simple courage to meet, to listen, and give the proper occasion, take time to pray. Believe me when I say it's never too late to pray. Such prayer opens our eyes to the suffering that's more at hand and far away, and helps move our heart to respond, building bridges to overcome whatever divides might be. Let it be said that such prayer does not in any way minimize the profound importance of one's personal prayer. We should not have to be convinced that prayer, be it personal, public, or in silence, which often accompanies interfaith prayer, is an essential stepping stone for the need of peace. When we say amen to our own personal prayer and that of the other, we're made to realize that more can and should be done for people, especially those mostly in need. It's difficult for me to see, and I'm quite sure for you, the stinging and overwhelming evidence of the tragic events left by the war in Gaza and events of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and not be brought to prayer. You will agree that this is an important incident where prayer needs to move mountains. I do believe that whenever interfaith groups gather to plan and discuss certain events, to do so in the absence of prayer creates the risk of failure. So, if I may say so, I do believe that the University of Cape Breton could, in fact, distinguish itself well beyond the confines of the campus borders by establishing an interfaith working group. Really, that's my challenge to this university, to establish a working faith interfaith group. You know, I spent 7 years as a student on campus. And I also had the opportunity to be a teacher on campus. And I'm quite aware that tensions and frictions can and do arise and need resolution. You know, a functioning interfaith prayer group can be a genuine service in bringing any number of conflicts to resolution. Such an interfaith group who gives priority to prayer will be surprised at what it can achieve. And I'm confident that the formation of an active interfaith working group on the campus here would be fully embraced by the Office of Campus Ministry, as well as it would be by the faculty, by the staff, by the student body. Indeed, even the president himself could hardly deny the significance of the formation of such a group as it seeks to strengthen the life of the campus. Given the cultural diversity of the campus, all the essential ingredients are fruitful and productively present here for interfaith. And I'm not even to say even in an overwhelming way. Such a group is a powerful symbol whose presence creates the condition for the possibility of becoming an effective means for a stepping stone of peace at home and well beyond itself. You know, in its formation and throughout its duration, membership in this interfaith group is intended to be an occasion of grace upon grace, bringing a deep, even an unexpected degree of personal and communal fulfillment and satisfaction, especially to the participants. It becomes a complement and an enrichment in the environment in which you're living. I do believe an active and successful interfaith working group on the campus here would soon send a clear signal to the whole of Cape Breton Island with regards to the significance and the importance that a similar need does exist. As already noted, it's important to insist on noting that whenever interfaith groups gather to plan and discuss important events, To do so in the absence of prayer, as I say, does increase the possibility of failure. So, in conclusion, perhaps it would be helpful just simply to note a few important dynamics about prayer when gathering as an interfaith working group. For example, if an interfaith working group is in the beginning stages, it's quite natural that not everyone is comfortable with sharing spoken prayer. Such a circumstance must be respected until such time that as one's confidence to engage in spoken prayer and share freely happens. Representatives should be given the time needed to arrive at their own personal comfort zone. In the meantime, legitimacy should be given to silent prayer, which brings confidence to the whole group. Within the interfaith dynamic of prayer, listening within the group is an important priority. You know, you just don't gather there so you can speak your prayer and then not be engaged in what the other's intentions and needs are. And aggressive behavior creates a sense of alienation and causes a measure of disinterest and withdrawal on the part of others within the group. A balanced participation is the goal. This applies to times given as the working group and time for prayer. Especially as a working group, points of disagreement will no doubt arise. That's to be expected. Such instances are, I would suggest, to be expected, and when they do, prudence should prevail. For example, it's important that the difficulty should be set aside and revisited at a more appropriate time. And in the meantime, seeking resolution should be integrated within the prayerful context. Patience are truly a needed virtue. And prior to following formal interfaith prayer, casual time should be given to discussion and issues of common concern. And such is quality time, since it creates an opportunity to bring more familiarity with one another, building the bonds of friendship. Whenever prayer is followed by fellowship and accompanied by food and drink, sensitivity should be given to the types of food and drink being offered, since some are not accustomed to what is so common to most of us. And so, in conclusion, are you still with me?
Yeah, we're here.
So let me say that, in conclusion, let me say that I do believe the topic and the time given to tonight's discussions would be of singular interest to Reverend Greg MacLeod, whom this lecture is being honored tonight. In his service and ministry to the people of God, he was not only a dedicated Roman Catholic priest, but a true servant, prophet, and pioneer at home and abroad. Let me again express my personal thanks and gratitude for your interest and time given here this evening. And going forward, I'm hopeful that these reflections will be in some way helpful, especially as we continue to grow within our increasing multicultural and interfaith environment. And so I thank you for the time you've given me, and I know there's a brief time for questions that may arise or may have arisen. Thank you.
Thank you for your words. I would like to quickly open the floor for any questions anyone might have.
I'm going to start off, Damien, if you don't mind. You're here tonight because of a phone call between me and Brian 6 weeks ago, Brian Joseph, because at that time, before the ceasefire in Gaza, we wanted to organize, out of the blue, a prayer service for the whole city to pray for some resolution to the horror of the Gaza and what was going on. And we came and met with you, and the basic message both of you gave us was, before you jump into the deep end of the pool, for God's sake, learn to paddle. And we were just jumping into the deep end of the pool, unaware of, how that was fraught with difficulty and with the emotion that was involved in what was going on at the time. So you wisely advised us to pull back and start in another direction. And this direction would be the formation of an interfaith, intercultural committee. I hadn't at that time thought of it at the university. I thought of it in terms of the whole community. Tonight you're centering into the university, and I'm just in listening to that, I'm thinking that's probably the best route to go at this point. And but you mentioned at the end prayer. For many, and I'm not making a judgment there, I'm just going on my own experience. When you're dealing with a lot of people, particularly young people today, when you jump into the business of prayer immediately, there's a certain wall. How do we start at this university? Where do we start? Do we start immediately with an interfaith prayer? I like the word you used at one point with your meeting with the imams, acquaintance. How do we go about getting acquainted? Because I know certainly within the city, there are all kinds of islands of isolation of the various cultural groups. This would be probably a very unique place to overcome that. What baby steps can we take?
Well, I think some of those steps, I might say, are already in place. I would dare say that there's not a Christian here who doesn't know a Hindu on campus as friends. By this time, there are some friendships that have developed on an interfaith, parallel. To the degree that students are invited to consider your friend, or those that you know, let's just gather together for an open conversation about this possibility of doing something as an interfaith group. Now, you may have an agenda item that you don't know what to do with. Or you may have 2 or 3 agenda items that you never even thought about sharing with anybody. Let's come together and without challenging one another, trusting one another, listening to one another, see where that would lead us. And if that would lead us, and I think there's some leadership that needs to be a part of that as well, to see if that would begin to build the kind of environment that can create what I would call an interfaith working group. Oh, listen, this was very good tonight, they say. I never sat with so many different people and talked about things that I think are interested as they do as well. Yeah, I think we could do something together. Well, that kind of interaction, I think, on the campus is what would create, as I would say, the condition for the possibility of moving. But it needs to have leadership attached to it as well. So that we all have certain boundaries, and we don't want to get involved in things that create problems before we get it organized ourselves.
What's the difference between interfaith and ecumenical? Just briefly.
Well, the ecumenical is related to the Christian world. As I mentioned, the prayer of John's Gospel is the unifying element that they all may be one. When Christians gather for ecumenical initiatives, they come together as a stepping stone, you might say, to unity, to bring that unity that the gospel calls us to. So conversion is part of the ecumenical, which is not the context of interfaith. We don't gather as interfaith, secretly to be converted. Our Jewish friends, our Muslim people, are the Hindus, But we gather in that environment with great respect and tolerance and acceptance, and allowing them to speak if they need to of their faith and their belief. And if they want to hear about mine, I'd be happy to tell you that. But we're not in competition in the interfaith group. Yeah. So, all right. Well,
You gave examples of when you were in Toronto. How many years ago was that?
oh, why do you ask me?
Because they were great steps back then, you did a lot.
Well, I was its director from from the year 1999 to 2016.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. The climate was right, quite frankly.
Yes.
It just wasn't focused and unified, you know what I mean?
I'd like to continue the conversation and the exchange of ideas that Father Bill initiated, because as Father Bill pointed out, you focused on the possibility of this happening at the university. And we have the chaplain here tonight, Father Doug, who knows the territory so well. And I'm going to ask Doug if he would respond in some way to this idea, and perhaps also consider the possibility of some outreach or involvement with the larger community. If people, it turns out, are interested in forming such an association, I brought an old clipboard and a notebook, so please give us your contact information after.
Before Doug responds, I'd like to point out something that might be of interest or add to what he might be considering. Is that Greg MacLeod, many years ago, founded what he called the Abraham Institute here at CBU, which consisted of Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and to promote the kind of thing we were doing. Of course, at the time, there were not all these other groups that have come in, other faith groups that have come in since. The religious complexity then was basically Christians, Jews, and Muslims. The thing never took off, I think. Greg was busy with 1,000 other things, and so it never, he didn't find anyone to make it really happen. It's probably still on the books, but anyway, it's just as a prelude to your response, is just to point out that there may be an existing structure, or at least it's something that was tried and could be expanded on in a more general way.
Thank you.
Most of your the examples you used in your Toronto experience were about Abrahamic religions. You touched very briefly on Hinduism. Was there more of that, or was it mostly today Muslim, Christian? And what is really the purpose of interfaith, other than knowing about each other as for people who believe in God? I would assume. I don't know.
Well, the church, the Catholic Church, recognized its own failure.
Yes.
And realized that we can't go on this way. And therefore, and by the way, this Nostra Aetate was one of the last decrees that was written. You know, I think it was called Ubea. To recognize that we're talking about the people of God. You know, no, we're not talking just about Catholics or Jews, but we've got to give recognition and cooperate and participate with all of God's people.
Right.
So in some ways we do that already even without knowing your religion. You know what I mean? Sometimes people build relationships and cooperation, and finally, after a certain time, they find, oh, I didn't realize you were a Muslim, or I didn't realize you were a Jew. But that's not to be taken negatively. So it's important. It's a responsibility that as a baptized Christian, it's responsibility. It's yours, my responsibility, and yours to open the doors not just to Catholics or Christians, but to the whole world. So we haven't done that. There was a time in which we hadn't done that with any great success, you know. I mean, if you're a Roman Catholic, as a child, you were left to question, are the Protestants going to be saved? You know? And like, you probably now question, why wasn't I ever allowed to go into a Protestant church as a young boy? I wasn't allowed to do that because that was so off limit. Like this interfaith.
Just in that Nostra Aetate, it's interesting. I studied the history of the thing. Originally, it was intended only for Catholic-Jewish relations.
Yes, exactly.
It was the bishops of India and Indonesia who said no. Vast majorities of people are Hindu and Muslim, and they too we have to cooperate for the betterment of the world. And I think where we're at now, personally, I think we have to go even beyond matters of people of faith.
Mm-hmm.
I think as human beings, we work together, but as structures that exist that I think enable all humanity to work towards peace and justice would very sensibly be religious groups that proclaim to live that. So I think it has to be interfaith, but I think, as Dan said, it even goes beyond that it's an invitation to all humanity, and that such things as different faiths should not be dividing us in this common purpose.
Oh, totally agree, absolutely, yeah. Yes.
So like, I was kind of curious. I was wondering, like, were you ever like invited into a space where there was like an interreligious conflict and having to like bring resolution, or how do like different religions kind of like agree or like cooperate? Have you had experiences where people disagreed and then you had to kind of work it out? Like, what does that look like?
Have I ever had that experience, Judy?
Yeah, like, what, even if you haven't, like, how does it look like to have all these different religions come together, like, peacefully to agree on something, or like just to get to know each other more? Because my perspective of different religions is, I've seen like the coastal side, because of the part of the world that I come from, my country, like, there's a lot of interreligious, like, fights. So, like, hearing about religions coming together peacefully sounds really interesting and foreign to me. So I kind of want to like know what does that like look like, and have you ever been in a situation where you had to bring peace between like religions that were in conflict?
Yeah. Well, my first response would be to say not everybody is always ready to do interfaith coordination or cooperation or prayer, you know. If, for example, people come with a high degree of prejudice toward Catholics, say, the interfaith environment, and if that's where they need to express all of that, they're not ready for interfaith cooperation. They're not ready. The stepping stones have not even taken place in their life where they began to build trust in people whom they're coming to know for the first time. I mean, they may be full of such energy that's negative and such anger that hasn't been processed properly that they don't function well. And that's not the place to be in an interfaith cooperation.
And Father, so often in a lot of the conflicts we talk about, so often in the West, we dismiss religion as you know, but we forget that a lot of the world is religious, and a lot of the conflict we see. And I just have a short quote, if I may, from Hans Cole, and I think I showed it to you before. No peace among the nations without peace among religions. No peace among religions without dialogue between the religions. And no dialogue between the religions without the investigation of the foundation of the religions. I think once we have come to a study, I taught in a high school with various religious groupings, and I taught world religions, and it was absolutely fascinating, because while I might approach it from the outside, when the students would present their faith from their lived experience, we all learned so much in that dialogue, and it was so important. But I think we have to understand. Sometimes we accuse before we understand. So again, a lot of times I think if we want peace in the world, we have to take a look at how religion can sometimes cause a bit of the conflict, and if we don't understand, and that's very
I just wonder, in my own curiosity, how many people would guess that there are more Catholics than Muslims? How many Muslims do you think are in the world?
Huh?
Oh, yeah, a lot, but
I'm guessing 1 billion.
1.4.
2 billion.
2 billion.
2 billion? Where'd you get your information? Yeah, you're right, 2 billion. You know how many Roman Catholics are in the world?
1.3 billion.
Yes, I'm afraid that these religions, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish, have deviated from the teaching of their books, of the prophet and of the Bible and whatever we have in our traditions way back. And I have right now befriended a family, Muslim family from Beirut who are living now in Sydney, a doctor and his wife, who's a nurse. And they tell me that what the prophet preached from the Quran is not what the Muslims are doing in the world, and the same way with the Catholics and the Protestants and so on. And so it's where they deviated from the direction that God gave them, through those 2 books, the Bible for the Jews and the Protestants and Catholics, and the Quran for the Muslims. And so if we get together and talk about these things as you suggest and so on, I think we can get to understand our deviations are not founded in good theology, you might say. And maybe we could correct that by following our Quran and our Bible. They're teaching love and not violence and all that sort of stuff. They're really teaching true love and of your neighbor and so on. I don't see that happening in the world today. It's getting there's very little love that I can see in general.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that in general, religion is struggling in ways that it hasn't in the past. The whole measure of secularization and what it has done, it's a crime to think your kids can't learn religion in school. No, this won't happen. It doesn't happen. Well, it does happen in some places, but you think that religion is such a foundational need in everybody's life that to know it and to believe it would be help to learn it, you know what I mean? But religion is no longer the first priority in many, many choices that people make. Anyways.
And that's all for the questions tonight. Thank you. And thank you everyone for your curiosity. I would like to welcome another member of our chaplaincy team now for an official thank you to him, Elma.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elema. I'm standing here this evening just to say thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for coming to be with us here and to listen to the topic that we learned a lot this evening. So to summarize, our discussion tonight was, can interfaith prayer be a stepping stone for peace at home and abroad? And myself, I would say from the discussion that we had this evening, it's yes. it's a stepping stone. We have heard that for us to have peace and to have a group, we should all have mutual respect for one another, and there should be a dialogue. Meaning, we cannot say, I'm a Christian, I associate with Christians, I'm a Muslim. That will not bring peace to us, because we'll continue creating bridges between us. For us to be able to build a community which is bind together, we need to have love for one another. We need to be united. For us to achieve that, we all need to have love for ourselves. I cannot love my neighbor if I don't love myself. I need to love myself, and so that I'll be able to love the next person. Also, you shared the important thing that I really loved, to say what I have is okay, what you have is okay, but what we have together is even better. Be like having a dialogue with someone with a different belief from me doesn't take away my belief. It doesn't take away our belief. So if we understand that, it will help us to build a better world. It will help us to improve this world. So with this, I just want to say there are 4 main words that he kept on repeating. It's mutual respect, it's having a dialogue, it's love, and doing justice to each other. And in all our faith, we strive for peace. We believe, although we believe different, we have different values, but at the center of it all, we all believe, and the central part of our faith is love, is justice, and prayer. So prayer is the stepping stone, is the essential stepping stone to building an interfaith, a multi-faith group, and that is possible. So the challenge we got to this evening is, let's take the initiative. Let's set our differences aside and try to work together so that the journey will be smooth and we'll enjoy the journey of our faith together. With this, on behalf of the CBU chaplains and the Newman Society, we say thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well said.
Now I would like to welcome someone who is a part of our chaplaincy team at the Utamagi College here at Cape Breton University to thank him and his family from Lingan. Please welcome Raven.
Oh, my.
And now I would like Father Duff to say a few words.
Thank you. I'd like to address your question. Thank you. I'd like to address it this way by saying we indeed do have the infrastructure with a great team, and when we hire people in chaplaincy, one of the questions that never gets asked is, what is your religion? It just doesn't come up. But it's just amazing we have such a diverse group of Muslims, we have Hindus, we have many different Protestants and Catholics, Sikhs on our chaplaincy team. And so I would like to say, to acknowledge that, some of us in our team, like Fatima and Ella, are from Nigeria, and they've experienced a lot of persecution in Nigeria as Christians. And I simply name that because sometimes fear can be at the root of a lot of these conflicts. I remember when I was in the parish in 2015, if you recall, there was a push to invite and welcome Syrian refugees. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And I called a meeting to see who in the parish would be interested. Nobody showed up. So I prayed about what to do. I felt It was the right thing to do, so we made the application. And when I went to find a place for them to live, I couldn't get anybody to rent me a place. So guess what I did? I asked one person, would you rent your house to me? They said, well, sure, to you, Father, no problem. So I moved out and I gave the Syrian refugee a complete house. And needless to say, it didn't necessarily go over that well in the beginning. But Abraham, his wife, and 4 kids came, and I got to tell you that once they arrived, and once people on the ground level met them, all that fear disappeared, and they loved them deeply. And so I think it's important that we establish these relationships, because often fear and insecurities about people who are different can be at the root sometimes of our hostilities. And I'll simply end with a cute little story. We're at St. Peter's Seminary years ago. We had an interfaith event with a Jewish rabbi. And we were having a big dinner after, and we invited the Jewish rabbi and his wife and others to come down. But somebody forgot to tell the cook. We were having ham and scalloped potatoes. Well, I can tell you, the priest in charge, Father Murray Watts, he was so upset. But he forgot to make that call. Forgot to call the kitchen. So, something as small as that, the dinner menu, and you brought that up. And we have to be conscious of all these realities. So, with that, we will embrace this project. We do have the infrastructure, and we'll pray about how to make it happen.
Good, thank you.
And now to end off, head back to our MC.
Thank you, Father Doug. I think that brings us to the end of this event tonight, and I would like to thank you all very much for attending. Thank you.